Welcome. Lovely to see everybody. There's quite a lot of new faces, which is really nice, and a couple of regulars as well, which is always good. So if you haven't met me, I'm Beth. I'm education curator at Freelands Foundation, and welcome to the second session of Artist Teacher for this year. This is Andy's first session of the year, and as we mentioned last month, Andy and Kate are kind of alternating months. But they're kind of all connected with and carry through the concepts and themes of being an artist teacher. The group has really dramatically grown over the last few months. We were just talking about it, saying it feels a bit like Glastonbury at the moment, trying to get but it's really nice, lovely to see so many people, particularly during half term, where we all could have had a week off our screens. So thank you for joining. We really appreciate it's been a busy, crazy time for everyone, and it's really lovely to see everybody, and hopefully we can have some good, inspiring conversations. I've got a couple of boring things. We're only going to have one breakout room tonight. We're going to have a series of presentations, and then we're going to have a breakout room. The session will be recorded, so let me know if you don't want to be recorded or on the screen or anything like that. Just drop me a message or an email. But what there isn't, we can't record the breakout rooms. So what we would ask, similar to what we did last month, is that we kind of document the session. So you take screenshots or photos of your notebooks or sketchbooks, and we're kind of really keen to kind of build an archive and catalogue of all these kind of conversations and experiences that we're having during these sessions. So as a reminder to grab a piece of paper or pen if you haven't got one at the moment. You've got a couple of minutes. But yeah, if you want to, what we did do last month, which was Kate's idea, is to put your Instagram handle as your name, just so if you do want to connect with each other, that's a really easy and useful way. We are also, I'm going to share a link with you, which is where you can upload your documentation. And you'll also be using that for something that Andy's going to talk about later. So I'll share a Google form link with you where you can upload stuff, but I'll do that in the chat anyway. Okay, I think that's all from me, all the boring stuff. Everybody's on mute at the moment, but you can unmute yourself when you want to talk. Andy?
Yeah, or Andy Ash.
Me, Andy.
Andy Ash.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you in a minute, Andy. I'm just setting up my screen, so just bear with me. Okay, brilliant. Is that clear, Beth? Is the little green box in the right place?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to move my pickies. So welcome, everybody. As you know, tonight we're going to focus on a very simple question, and we're going to focus on sharing our understandings and insights to that very simple question of what does it mean to be an artist teacher. I've managed to convince a few people to speak, to share their perspectives, but we're hopefully going to have some time to then sort of, as Beth said, meet in small groups where we can share and start to perhaps personalize some of our insights and understandings about that very question. So after the panel, it will be small groups, and then we'll come back for the last sort of 20 minutes where we can then sort of re-interrogate, perhaps go back to some aspects and start to think about questioning these different understandings, there's different insights and these different frames of reference or insights to that question. I wanted to also set a little task at the end that sort of builds upon the way that we have been working in the past, i.e. deliberately sort of generating, deliberately thinking about our practice and deliberately sort of sharing our practice. So I'm going to set a little task at the end that I'm hoping that people might want to take part in. But I'm going to start by looking back at something we did roughly a year ago, which was the discussion in the gallery, which was a nice hosted space, a space to inquire and to think about our making and to think about that in relationship to our teaching. So roughly a year ago, we had a little show where we started to reveal where we work. Now, there was lots of informal dialogue, lots about process, lots about the materials and the issues that have driven those individuals that shared and showed, that drove their making and their relationship to their teaching and their making. There was quite a lot of range about context. It was quite an eclectic range of understandings and intriguing explanations. So as well as the visuals, the kind of visuals you see on the screen now, we also had people just giving very short explanations, and you'll see, you know, they range from literally Joseph's shed on the top left right through to Emily's kind of kitchen table, sort of dining room table, exploring how people's spaces influence their production and their teaching. There was a lot also about tensions in these spaces, and the fact that, for instance, Ben in the top left there showed his classroom as his studio, and there was discussion about the relationship between the teaching and the making, and not having spaces as much as perhaps others had, like perhaps Rebecca's sort of purpose-built and you know, purposely sort of laid out spaces. So what I thought would be interesting is to think about moving beyond just where we work and how we work and when we work. And I wanted to think a little bit about moving towards that why and in what as well. So we've formed a little panel of 3 people who are going to talk to us about that movement from where we work to thinking about you know, that difference of why and thinking about unpacking those changes in the year. So we've gone from 16 artists, 16 images and 16 statements to just 3 that I picked from that previous point. So we've got Andy, who's going to start the panel discussion with us. And it was interesting at that point, Andy showed a really lovely picture of the park while he was on a run as his space for making. It was that sort of sense of him valuing space on his own when he was out and reflecting upon that sort of moment in time and those different spaces he found he was moving through and finding himself in. That was the emphasis. And he also talked about the artist teacher network as being a key space for him. So I'll be really intrigued to hear his sort of take now post COVID, seeing as how we talked a lot about social production as an aspect of his practice. Keda's going to talk to us as well. She's the second member on our panel. And what was really nice when she talked about her work, it was that she talked about herself being quite nomadic in the spaces that she found herself. And so we've got this picture of her on the bus being her only quiet time for reflection and for thinking, which was really interesting. But also she talked about the importance of the value of the community and collaborations that inspired and that facilitated her making. And then the third panel member is going to be Henry Ward. And what was quite interesting with Henry is that he chose to show us 3 images, whereas everybody else only chose 1. Henry gave us 3 very different sort of perspectives, and quite rightly so, because for him it was multiple places and multiple types of production that were produced in these different spaces. So the table, the shed, and the studio. Okay, so each of our panel members are going to speak for 10 minutes about their personal perspectives in response to the question, what does it mean to be an artist teacher? We will then have an opportunity to go, say, in small groups to discuss, to reflect on the questions and the points raised, and then try to answer the questions from our own sorts of perspectives, try and tease out some understandings, and then think about the questions you might want to ask the presenters when we come back. So that leaves me just to invite perhaps Andy, if you'd like to share the screen, and if you'd like to come up first, I'll stop sharing and you can start to take over. Is that okay, Andy? Are you all right to monitor time, or do you want me to watch for you as well?
You can give me a shout if I'm going over.
Very happy to, if you want me to.
Tell me if I've got a minute left or something. Is my screen shared? It is. Lovely. Okay.
All good. All good.
Great. Right then. Okay. So this has felt the idea. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this. It feels quite indulgent. I hope you'll get something out of it. I just hope that it's a sharing process or a provocation, perhaps. We'll see, won't we? So my name's Andy. I think a lot of you know me already. I'm head of art at secondary and sixth form in a comprehensive school in Hersham. Been there since 2009. And I think, first of all, I've got to say that I've got a bit of a crisis of identity. I don't really know. Am I an artist or teacher? Am I either right now? And that's what really this talk's going to be about, as well as a bit of a summary of how this latest COVID experience has affected me and my work, and where my energy has sort of gone in response to that. I don't know about post-COVID. For me, I still feel very much part of, in the middle of COVID, but we'll see. Hopefully it's post. I'm looking forward to it being a phase. So that first question then, do I strongly identify as an artist or a teacher right now? It got me thinking, and I'm sure that many people will do this sort of thing already, but it got me thinking about what were the artworks that have kind of moved me, the most important artworks that have moved me in my life, and that's what you can see on the screen now. I think the kind of thing I've always been interested in doing is collaborating with people. Working within a community has been important. So school, that aspect of school has been massive to me. Early in my life, I wanted to be a filmmaker. So that's, working in a group to create something, a creative endeavor with lots of other people has been really important. And at school, it's been about exhibiting within the school environment, and also at the local gallery on a yearly basis. I really missed the exhibition that we have every summer. But in the classroom, I've also, I haven't shied away, and I've encouraged students from being political in their work. There's always there's always been that political side. It's something that I'd not discouraged. Not if they want to do something else, I absolutely encourage that as well. But I'm interested in the idea of exploring power and empowering other students or other people to explore power as well. So promoting artists that do that sort of thing in their work is something that I do quite often, particularly at Key Stage 4 and 5. So, your Ai Weiweis and Steve McQueen, the Della and Wallinger. And of course, those are the sorts of artists that have been showcased at the Turner Prize. And I think I only use this as a sort of shortcut to talk about the way that contemporary art seems to have gone over the last decade or two or three. And, there are artists. It's less the idea of the traditional model of the artist. And this works for some. And I think sometimes it works for me, and it may work for me in the future. But right now, I feel like I want to work with other people. And that seemed to be reflected in what was going on within the Turner Prize itself as well. So forensic architecture, a good example of that. There were a nomination fairly recently, and this is an example of a piece of a project that's on their website. They collect evidence and information and visual imagery created by people on social media as a way of generating evidence for crimes and things that happen across the world. This is Black Lives Matters related, and each one of those dots corresponds to police brutality against civilians, medics, legal observers. You can get lost looking at this. There's plenty to it. Another example, of course, is Assemble. They won a few years back. They're another group of people who work together as a group. This is something that sort of resonates with me. And of course, the last Turner Prize to properly happen, they all decided to share the prize. So there's something quite political about that idea as well. And I wonder if we're going to see the Turner Prize in the same way in the future. And I've always been interested in how that sort of thing can be reflected in classrooms. So I talk about facilitating political responses. Some of you might be wary of that, and I think as teachers we do have a responsibility. It's a huge responsibility we have in the classroom, and a bit of a balance that we need to strike. And I do think that teaching is inherently political. I think this is a really good example of where politics can enter the classroom, and us as teachers have to decide what we're going to do about it. If anyone's watching It's a Sin at the moment, this is the scene where the gay teacher in the series is asked to go through the library and find any reference to homosexuality, because Section 28 was about stopping the promotion of it in school. There's a Thatcher quote there about the inalienable right of people to be gay. I think it's just obviously a abhorrent statement, but these are issues that are, well, maybe not this issue, but we have issues in the classroom right now. I think there's a big question of where our individual lines are. So I encourage students to do what they want to do. And so Max here is obviously kicking off and making graffiti and doing something anarchic. Louisa here short film about social identity. I don't know if you can hear me above that. So she's looking at 3 versions of herself as in different classes. Joe here, another sixth former, was looking at Donald Trump, the spectacle of Trump, and exploring, well, it sort of speaks for itself. He's just looking at the silences in between all the stuff that he spouted. And this raises ideas of free speech, something that the government and the DfE just tweeted about today, actually. Free speech and safe spaces, and that tension at universities. If this was a student who'd critiqued a Churchill speech or a Blair speech or a Corbyn speech, maybe I wonder what that would have been like. It tends not to happen. The line would be drawn if there was an intolerance or a fascism that a student wanted to promote. But it does raise those questions about how we navigate within the classroom when we've got students that want to express themselves politically. So promoting artists who deal with contemporary issues at the moment, though, has felt problematic to me, because the biggest issue for me has been safety in schools. And I wondered, could that be an issue that I could explore in the classroom? I'm talking about COVID, the safety of being in a school at all at the moment. At the same time as that, as an artistic preoccupation, my teaching also starts with the safety of my community, and that really has felt like a massive rupture to me, because I haven't felt safe. It's not personal safety. I'm worried about the virus spreading in the community, and seeing kids come in school without masks has just done my head in, quite frankly. We have had, I have run projects that have explored that. So this was something that all of our year 7s did in the last lockdown. I've repeated it this lockdown, and asked them to shake hands with someone in their household. And I found it quite a poignant idea that, but I don't know when we're going to shake hands again, quite frankly. Maybe we will, hopefully we will. But I think it's a nice portrait of our community. And we've also explored this with our year 9. So the idea of how art is affected by context, we felt was quite an important thing to explore. So our year 9s, we showed them Christophe Buchel's Barca Nostro, which means our boat. This is a boat which was shown at the Venice Biennale without any context. There was no plaque, no explanation. People sipped their wine in front of it and got photos and selfies, and eventually realized that Christophe Buchel had somehow got hold of a boat that sank in the Mediterranean, killing 700 refugees that barely registered in the news. And it's happening on our doorstep, and we don't know anything about it. And I think that's the point he was trying to make. Some people felt that it was clearly provocative, and lots of people argue that it was disgusting. It was something to discuss, as was this. So we showed them, we segued into this. It was a project about text in art, and took the opportunity to show them this led by donkeys. It's a refugee talking about his experience of coming across the channel, working for the NHS, and then the government complaining about asylum seekers and refugees and using them as a scapegoat, projected onto the White Cliffs of Dover. How am I doing, Andy?
You've got about 35 seconds.
I've gone off. Never mind. Okay. So anyway, my attention has been completely diverted to activism. So it's been influenced by the representation of teachers in the media, and the fact that our schools don't look like this. Kids aren't wearing masks in classrooms. Desks aren't this far apart, despite all the assertions that they are. We don't have small class sizes. That's what Williamson was lying about. We're supposed to be heroes. We're betraying our children. We're sabotaging school reopenings. We're basically, this is what people think of teachers, and it's really got under my skin. So I've become union rep, and we have another 3 reps. We're growing as a team. I've made some graphics to promote the local Labour Party. I've got more involved in that. I'm going to be secretary there, hopefully. There's a new HQ, so I've put forward possible ideas for a mural. We raised money for a working food bank. Copied another CLP I got on the BBC radio Surrey promoting that, and we raised £615 towards it. And that's the sort of thing that I've been putting my energy into recently, and that's kind of where I am. There you go.
That's great, Andy. Thank you very much. And what's really interesting is that is quite a big shift, isn't it? From being in the park and thinking alone to far more collaboratively and far more activism orientated. Okay, so perhaps that's something we'll have a think about. Keda, are you ready? Are you able to share and make a start on your presentation?
Yes, I am. Hang on, let me get the screen share up. Oops, sorry, too far off the side. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I really enjoyed that, Andy. Thank you. It was really nice to see a bit of politics and activism coming into it, because I know we've kind of mentioned that stuff before, and I work with that a lot as well. So coming back to where we work, or where I work exhibition, the photo I brought in was, like Andy showed, a bus, because when I first joined the Artist Teacher Network, I wasn't working in a school anymore, or a FE college or whatever. I was working in Tate and doing some supply teaching and kind of all over the place. So I feel like I work everywhere in both my artist practice and as a teacher. So on that journey in particular, I was on my way to teach an FE class. But on the way I thought and planned, and I took this photo, but I also took videos of the shadows of the light coming in, and recorded the movements and the sounds, and came home and played with that. And so that was part of my work as well. And as I don't have a studio or a classroom, or even a bit of spare space because I sleep in this living room, I often really struggle with feeling like an artist and sometimes a teacher, but I feel more comfortable with the teacher thing for some reason. So the majority of my working life has been concerned with working with others, as a teacher, an arts facilitator, or as a mother. And I've done quite a lot of political stuff. I've done quite a lot of workshops, specifically dealing with young people and their civic participation and what they think. But I've also worked with all ages, from primary right up to HE. So I discuss kind of the idea of being an artist with a lot of friends who are also artists or writers or critics, whatever, and particularly mothers, as we often feel that it's hard to feel justified in inhabiting or asserting yourself as an artist, the word artist. And although I don't work as a teacher at the moment, I still feel comfortable saying I'm a teacher, but I still have problems sometimes with the word artist, and I'm not sure why that's problematic, because I kind of like to be. And I do a lot of artistic things. I write. Living in Istanbul as a single parent to twin daughters for 16 years, I taught at a school every morning. I also ran private art and English classes, and I wrote for Time Out magazine and an arts magazine. I also homeschooled every afternoon and published a blog where I posted photos and stories and essays to stay connected with my family back home and the rest of the world. And I kind of, in a way, lived a sort of lockdown life then, because I didn't have family around me. I relied on my computer to get things out. So although I had the break in the morning at school, most of my time after that was at home, was homeschooling, was, trying to keep in touch over the internet and early Skype and stuff. But I did have a much larger box then and a lot better weather. In this lockdown, I ended up doing the same thing. I wrote again. I wrote for an online writer's journal and an art zine that was put together by other freelance cultural workers, most of whom have lost their jobs. And I also had just started an arts project with solo parents in my local borough. And so I took that online and posted art prompts and ideas. So my kids are now 18, and in a lot of ways I had a much easier lockdown than most parents or teachers. But then, as I said, I lost most of my paid work, and I had very little contact with anyone else apart from my daughters, and through working as an evaluator remotely for my local cultural education partnership, which was also, again, a lot of research and writing and being on the computer. But being so isolated, I had a lot of time to reflect and get frustrated with my real lack of space, no garden, no balcony, no, nowhere else to go to get away. But then writing has always given me some. It's always given me space and time because it spans outside of where you already are. So it's something that I always go to, whether it's published or not. I also draw. I've always done abstract works, and in lockdown I started doing live classes again, and I'm not particularly great at it, but it was really good fun and I still really enjoy it because it's communal. I also make stuff. So on the left hand side here you can see a book that I made when I was homeschooling the girls and I didn't have access to all the books and libraries that we have here. So most of this is quite old stuff, but the bottom right is some stitch that I'm actually working on. I've now added myself to it. You can see that's me in my living room, almost to scale. But that was inspired by one of Kate's prompts that she gave at the beginning of lockdown about marking or mapping time and space. And it's also influenced by a friend of mine who runs a project called Bordando por la Memoria, which she leads with the Chilean community. And it's based on traditional South American textile work, where Chileans, like a lot of other cultures, made and continue to make textile work, which tells the story of loved ones in Chile who were disappeared or jailed. But often it just retells other traumatic events or people's stories or expressions of activism in particular and hope. So a lot of banners it involve a lot of kind of applique work or textile work. And I really enjoy doing that. And it's something that as well a lot of people used to do to make a bit of extra money when they had no other income. So yeah, that's one that I've been making. It's, what I've been doing and mapping out the space has eventually turned into that. I also, as I mentioned earlier with that photograph on the bus, I take photographs and make short films. And I document our life like many of us do, particularly, again, mothers, but I know a lot of fathers who do it too. And I don't just do it just for memory, I do it with an aesthetic kind of purpose. And I've always been inspired by Mary Kelly, her postpartum document, in which she recorded everything that happened after the birth of her son. And I've always seen my life as a story worthy of recording in any way I can or decide to do, whether that's writing, whether that's photography or film, or as recently with the textile. And just before lockdown, I'd paid to be able to use a printing studio down the road, and I was starting to play with techniques to render my photos and my drawings and my poems in print. But yeah, that's something I'm very newly playing with, and it's quite hard again to do that at home. But one of the things that I used to really do a lot was perform. I used to collaborate with friends when I was at college and after college and create installations. And then till a few years ago, I sang in a choir. And now I can't do any of that, but I still help organise evenings, some over Zoom and some in real life when we could, or weekends with a very large group of women friends that I have. And part of the weekend always involved me leading a day where I cooked, and then we made books together and we shared recipes and listened to music and sang songs, and I'd make everybody do an interpretive dance, and we'd just do really silly kind of things but share stuff together. And so I see that kind of making of food and sharing those ideas and songs and music as a kind of new embodiment of my live or community arts that I was always so into. So yeah, I do all of these things, and there are definite connections and threads between each medium, but I still struggle with, is it art if I don't necessarily announce it or show it or make money from it? So I recently did an MA, and I came across a paper while I was doing it by Gregory Chalette about dark matter. And it's about those more marginalized or commercially unrecognized artists that are nevertheless essential to the survival of mainstream art stars. And he argues that these dark matter, people within the dark matter, they both feed the creativity of mainstream art, and through their artistic freedom and activism help democratize the art world. And I think that's definitely happening more and more, and it's something that I've always wanted to do. I also found another paper by a guy called Doubtfire who teaches in FE, and he was saying that it's all very well us knowing that, but it's really important that we teach with that in mind, and that we talk explicitly about it with students, with participants, and let them know that it's okay to just do art and be an artist in whatever form that takes, be it a star or a quiet or a loud part of the constellation of that dark matter. That, you know, all of these efforts, all of this artistic practice is important, and that there are no hard and fast rules. So yeah, what does it mean to be an artist teacher? I left university as a conceptual artist who made installations, performances and community arts, but I couldn't make ends meet. I couldn't become the stuff. So I moved to Turkey and began teaching. But then through teaching, I found a wider and deeper love for collaboration and co-creation. And I kind of got for a while into relational aesthetics, and I still quite like that. But the language has changed, which I'm really glad of, because now people introduce themselves as socially engaged artists, or they use art as a social practice. And I just love it, because that is what I always wanted to do. And now it's a thing, and we can say it, we can introduce ourselves as that. Because my teaching and my practice as an artist are completely intertwined. And I bring people and stories into my work, and I bring my work and my ideas into interactions with other people. It's just, they are completely one and the same and together. So yeah, so I just wanted to finish on this, which is one of my favorite pieces of art by an artist called Mike Kelly, who weirdly enough, Grayson Perry has mentioned that I think he's using on his art club this week. And I love this quote by him, because that's exactly how I felt when I was young. I found his work in the early 90s after I'd done my degree show, and I'd basically wallpapered a cell with gaudy cuddly toys quite similar to this, and had this whole kind of installation on that. But I love this, because when I found him and I found these kind of quotes, I just saw myself in it. You know, I wanted to rebel. I wanted to not work in the fields or at Tesco or get pregnant at 15, which is what my friends were doing. And I didn't care if I couldn't be part of society. I was happy to just get away and do something else. And I love playing with all sorts of materials and media like he did. He took photographs, he made films, he played with toys, he used paint, he did everything. But when I left art college, I was haunted by the quote, "If you can't do, teach." But my first job outside was working with refugees and families and communities, and I just loved it. I loved that co-creation, and I still do. So a few years ago, I mean, in somewhere between 99 and 2001, I saw this show. I saw, not this show, I think this is a picture of something later, but I saw a show of his in either LA or New York, I can't remember, it's a bit fuzzy. But we were allowed to touch his stuff, and we were allowed to, there was a big quilt with loads of toys under it, and we were allowed to lift it up and peer under it and find out what was there. And it was just so exciting. And I laughed and I cried, and there were other people in the audience doing the same. We were all just like, this is amazing. It was just such an incredible experience. And it made me, especially the name of this show, it just made me, you know, the connections with this dark matter and this satellites. And I just feel like I'm happy being dark matter, or a satellite swirling around Mike Kelly and his work. And
I'm sorry, Keda, but I'm gonna have not that I want to, but I'm gonna have to ask you if you can start to wrap up a little bit.
I am. This is my last.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry.
That's great. Yeah. So I've always wanted to kind of bring those feelings to other people, but I want to do that in the room with them. I want to kind of be able to work with other people and see them doing it. And I think that that's something great that has happened. We don't have to be ostracized as artists from society anymore. We can work with society and co-create with them. And as an artist and a teacher and a learner, you can do those things all together. So yeah, that's me. We're doing all those things together.
Brilliant. I think that sums it up really nicely. That philosophical position of co-creation, whether that as the artist or whether that as the facilitator, the teacher. And I also like the fact that you are really honest and open about those tensions of identity and those tensions about space and that relationship as a parent, as a mother, justifying the art making and justifying the sort of time. And that's really, it was really nice and visceral when you started talking about those relationships in the craft and in the community. That's really lovely. And I'm really sorry you didn't show us dancing. You promised me you were going to show me some pictures of you dancing, and you haven't. So I'm a bit upset now. So Henry, Henry, over to you next.
Okay, just share my screen. Right, thanks, Andy. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me, because it's nice to be talking to you all, not in the context of being the director of the foundation, but as an artist and a teacher. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, actually. I'm not really going to talk about COVID, partly because I'm just sick to death of it. I am so over the current situation. I just want to talk about things from a slightly broader perspective, I suppose. So I'm going to talk a bit about being an artist and a bit about being a teacher, and try and sum up a few thoughts about what I think that means, and what it means for me, what it has meant for me. So I'm a painter, and it's interesting coming off the back of what you were just saying, Keda, because I think I quite like the fact that I feel like I can say that now. And I think I've spent a lot of time of my life not feeling confident enough to say that. So I went to art school, like I'm sure lots of people here. And when I was at school, I had no idea at all really about anything except that I liked doing art. And then I found out there was this thing called art school, which sounded great because that meant you just did art all the time. So I wanted to go there, and then I went there. And the thing about art school when I was at art school was that nobody talked about anything that you were going to do with yourself when you left. There was no sort of professional practice or any kind of idea of the reality of the world. You just went and made work, and then you left, and then you were going to be an artist, or probably not in most cases. So I went to art school, and when I left art school, I was making things a bit like the top left there. So big, kind of ambitious, minimalist, abstract paintings that took up a lot of space and cost a lot of money and materials. And very quickly after leaving art school, the context I found myself in was that wasn't possible. So it was either making things in my tiny flat or making things in the very, very tiny studio I could just about afford with part-time, slightly shit jobs that were funding trying to be an artist. So my work changed a lot, and I made a lot of paintings that were kind of things around me and things I was looking at. And I sort of bumbled along for a few years with this sort of vague idea of being an artist and doing part-time jobs alongside it. And then I accidentally became a teacher. And the thing about teaching, it wasn't a complete surprise, because I'd always had a bit of an interest in education. In fact, I toyed with the idea of doing my thesis on alternative education and started reading books on it, and then veered violently in another direction and wrote about French films instead. And my mum had been a teacher, so I'd always been kind of aware of schools and teaching and that sort of context. But a friend of mine who was a primary teacher asked me to come and do a talk to her kids about my painting, and I went in, and it was just a sort of epiphanal moment. The reality that you could engage with young people and be talking about art and making things, it was just magical. And so I decided that I would be a teacher. Now, I thought what I'd do is I'd divide up my 10 minutes into three phases that I think of as, in a way, as the sort of different phases of my relationship to being an artist and being a teacher. And they're going to be associated with people that are hugely important to me. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Philip Guston phase. Now, Guston's been massively important to me for as long as I've been interested in painting. As an artist, he's a big influence. But Guston was also a remarkable teacher. And if you read anything by any of the people who were fortunate enough to be taught by Guston, they'll talk about what an incredible teacher he was. They'll talk about him being fantastically generous and insightful, and that he was just amazing. But the problem for Guston was that he saw teaching as a big issue. He saw teaching as a big problem for him, and he kind of hated teaching. And it wasn't that he actually hated teaching; he hated what teaching did. And I've talked about this before. This dilemma of being an artist, wanting to be an artist, and simultaneously wanting to be a teacher. And I didn't want teaching to just be a necessary evil to pay the bills that meant I could go off and be an artist somewhere else. I was really engaged in what teaching meant. But for a long time at the beginning of my teaching career, I saw this was a conflict. The time that I was spending teaching was time I wasn't spent being an artist, and then the time I was spent being an artist was taken away from teaching. I think we illustrate it with these two photos, which are taken at roughly the same time. So on the left, there's a workshop that I'm leading in the school I was teaching in, called 60-Minute Exhibition, and I was really excited by the kind of things that were going on in those workshops and with those students, and the kind of development and excitement and interest in sort of collaborative approaches. But at the same time, I was then trying to get to this studio I had down in Deptford with a group of friends in the evening and carry on making painting, which often enough meant sitting in the middle of the night drinking and talking about making paintings as well. And the problem is that when I was in the school, I felt bad about the fact that I wasn't making art. And when I was in the studio, I felt guilty about the fact I was in the studio and I wasn't doing stuff to do with school. And I really felt guilty about not being able to get to the studio. The studio became this albatross around my neck all the time. You know, I couldn't go there very often. When I was there, I felt pressure to make things. It was really difficult. So this kind of conflict, and I think it's a conflict a lot of people feel when they're both artists and they're trying to teach. You know, teaching is an overwhelming job. It's all encompassing. It takes everything. So I think it's really problematic. In 2008, some developers came in and we lost that studio that you just saw the photo of. And in a way, I saw that as being a bit liberating. And I was starting to get much more excited about different ways of thinking about my own art practice and thinking about how my art practice might sit with my teaching practice. So this is the next phase I'm going to talk to you about, which is the John Baldessari phase. Now, the thing about John Baldessari that blew my mind really was this idea of the post-studio, the idea that you didn't need a studio to make work, but also the idea that maybe what happened within the context of your teaching was part of your practice. And so to start with, I began really thinking about different ways of responding to the context that I found myself in. Most of the time, of course, was in a classroom. You know, if you're teaching, you're there from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. You go home, all you do is think about teaching. You've got no friends. So, you know, all your life is teaching. So actually, why not make that context your artwork? So things like this, these were some photos from a series of photographs of palettes that I took at the end of a year after teaching 684 lessons with those palettes. And, you know, the solution to the problem for me was summed up in this photo of one sketchbook. If all my ideas as a teacher and all my ideas as an educator were in one thing, what Keda was just talking about, this idea of kind of intertwined practice, then it made a lot of sense. And so this second phase, this kind of John Baldessari phase, is this idea that teaching itself is the art. And at the time, you know, I was very fortunate. I was working in an incredible faculty with some really, really engaging peers, and a number of us were really thinking about these ideas of what it would be if teaching became our practice. And so I formed a collective called Amalgam with another artist teacher called Andy Collard, and we started off by inventing a chewing gum called Amalgam, which we would give out. We began by giving it out to classes that we were teaching, and we'd get the students to chew while they were having lessons, which of course made us really popular teachers. And then they would sculpt with the chewing gum afterwards. And then we took the kind of context and the performance, if you like, of teaching outside of the school context. So we go and actually do the performance of the teacher in things like sort of local arts festivals. That's us doing a lecture on the right there. And we did all sorts of other projects as well. This was a camera that we built together, which was based on a late 19th century bellows camera that we took the back off and hooked it up to a USB flatbed scanner, made these big kind of scanned photographs from the 6-footers of Constable in Suffolk. And this idea of kind of collaborative practice became really, really important to me. And I was doing a lot more writing at this stage, a lot of lecturing as well outside of school about art education, and ended up doing this project with a group of students and of colleagues at Tate Modern for a year, where we looked at this whole idea of performative practice and ended up doing, in fact, 2 performances at Tate. So this period for me was really, really fruitful in terms of expanding my idea of what being an artist was, but very much within that context of what being an educator was. But I started out by saying, you know, I'm a painter, and the thing is, all the way through all of this more expanded practice is that I was still making paintings, and painting was still very important to me, and I wanted to go back to that. And I had a sort of internal battle of feeling like it was a bit indulgent. I think Andy said something earlier about indulgence, and I think it is quite easy to think about particularly studio-based practice as being a bit indulgent. Actually, you know, you're kind of spending time on your own, but you know what, like, so what? Actually, it's really great to do that. It's amazing, and especially at the moment, I mean, just incredible to be inside your head and doing things. So I want to talk, I'm coming to the end now, but I want to talk about the phase I feel I'm in now, which is the Philida Barlow phase. And Philida has become increasingly important to me as an artist and an educator. And I think what I'm really excited about when she talks about teaching, you know, she's extraordinary. She taught for about 60 years of her career. She taught, and she talks about the symbiotic relationship between teaching and making, and how the discursive space and the critical space of teaching informs her art making in a way that doesn't happen elsewhere in the art world. And, you know, I got out of school over 7 years ago now. And since then, I've still been involved in education through the foundation and through teaching and collaborating with Andy and Leslie at the Institute, and then also teaching as a visiting lecturer in art schools. And so the kind of teaching that I do has shifted. But I think the thing that really excites me about teaching now is that discursive space. And Philida talks about the fact that that space doesn't exist elsewhere. You know, if you don't teach as a successful practicing artist, you just put work in galleries and people go and look at it. There isn't that space for conversation, that space for unpicking of ideas. And my current practice is situated, as Andy mentioned at the very beginning this evening, in 3 spaces. I make small objects on my kitchen table after dark. I paint almost every day in my shed on paper, and that's become hugely important over the last year during COVID that I said I wasn't going to mention. And I do get to the studio to paint, still not as often as I want. But I think that for me, that arc that I've talked about means that now I feel I am an artist teacher, but in a way that sits both comfortably with making art, with making paintings, but with also being engaged in education and educational discourse. And that's me done, Andy, if that's all right.
Exemplary timing as ever, Mr. Ward. Bang on the nose. Thank you very much for keeping to time. Brilliant. So what's really nice about that is that lovely idea of the different phases, which I'm sure we can all identify with. Even if we only feel we're stuck in a phase, at least we can identify with that notion of a phase, and particularly that last bit you're talking about that sort of idea of teaching and artist teaching being a kind of a nice discursive kind of space. Okay, so we now have a chance to go away and reflect and ponder in small groups on what we've just heard from our panel. We have a chance to just sort of think about in small groups the questions and the points that each of our different panel members have raised, and try and think and maybe try and answer some of those questions yourself from your own sort of perspective. What do we identify with? What do we sort of think about? What don't we perhaps necessarily, or what phase are we not necessarily in comparison? So try and tease out perhaps your own understandings in your small group. And then importantly, what I think would be nice is if out of that there comes some questions you would like to come back to the presenters in light of your discussion, come back to the presenters and maybe see if we can sort of take that a little bit further in a whole group, and maybe see if we can sort of expand on some of the things that the panel has opened up for us. Very different perspectives, almost like on a continuum. I think it's a nice way of looking at it if we think about the different insights and the different perspectives. So Beth is now going to whiz you away into some small spaces. I'm going to ask those members who are frequent attendees or if we've got working party members to act as kind of a bit of a facilitator for us, and just kind of keep notes and maybe keep sort of copies of anything that people may share that might be helpful. But it'll be obvious when you appear in the room, those of you that have come frequently, that that's meaning you. Thank you, Beth. And we'll take about 20 minutes and then we'll come back for the discussion for about 20 minutes as well. Okay, great. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope that was sufficient time to start to think about a response, or to think about personalizing, and to think about your group and the sorts of aspects, points that you wanted to raise. And hopefully you've got some questions as well as perhaps some points to make for our panel. And hopefully we can start to, as I say, tease out some understandings and start to think about what this might mean for us when we think about that question. I'm led to believe there are 7 groups. Now, I don't know who's in what group and who's where. So I'm just going to ask group 1, if somebody from group 1 would like to just give us a quick sort of overview of perhaps some of the points raised, and maybe a question. So group 1, who would like to wave at me to indicate who was kind of group 1? I'm trying to look on 2 screens, so I can't see. Who is in group 1?
Say some names if it's easier. I've got the groups here.
Yeah.
It was Jess, Kate, Abby, and Leslie. Not to put you on the spot.
Hiya. We were just having quite a lovely chat about our various experiences over the last months. Really interesting range of people in our group, actually. So there's someone working in adult education, someone who is an NQT and an artist in residence at their place at the same time, which I thought was an interesting way of bringing the identities we always discuss together in quite a kind of, confident way. I think a question that we were considering just towards the end there for everybody else was, we were talking quite a lot about, this specific time that we're in, where as a normal discussion in the network is often, what if we had more time? What if we had more space? Suddenly we have maybe hopefully had a bit more time outside of, not having to travel, not having to commute, and how that's affected people's kind of sense of self in their creativity, whether they feel that they have a stronger sense of what they want. And I'm interested if the three presenters, if any of you feel that, whether it's affected how you feel about yourself and your identity as artist teachers, kind of if the last year has had an impact on that, basically, is what we were thinking.
Did anybody else from that group want to add anything to that? I mean, I know Keda was talking about very much about identity, and certainly Henry was thinking about his changing identity. But did anybody else want to add anything or ask a question? No? Okay. So, Henry, I mean, in terms of identity, I was intrigued when you used the word guilt, and it kind of resonated a little bit, didn't it? That sort of sense of identity and guilt. I wondered, did you mind just saying a little bit more about that? The tension that because I'm sure that resonates particularly with people.
Yeah, well, I think somebody put it in the chat as well about that resonating. I think that art does feel a bit self-indulgent, doesn't it? And when you're sort of, in order to do anything really, you're immersing yourself in your own head. You're trying to kind of understand something, and that can feel a bit self-indulgent. And I think that one of the things about teaching is that it's actually not very self-indulgent. It's so often about giving to others and exploring ideas and sharing and being tremendously generous. So I think the balance between those two things is quite tricky at times. And I think just to pick up on what you were saying, Kate, there about how maybe that kind of thing has shifted. It's difficult to answer that. I find it difficult to answer that question because I'm not teaching as much as lots of people on the screen are. But I think my experience of the last 12 months has been definitely in phases, not the phases I was just talking about, but other phases of initially in lockdown feeling just like this joyous change of pace of kind of everything from just hearing the birds singing to kind of not having to commute anywhere, and loving the whole lockdown and absolutely loving the fact that I didn't have to come up with elaborate excuses to avoid social engagement. So I'd stupidly put in my diary that then I realized I was too tired to do. And now in this sort of third phase of lockdown, I bite somebody's hand off to go to the pub with somebody I really don't like. So I think it's I think there's a kind of a terrible arc of my experience. Certainly, I'm desperate for human contact again, and to have a diary full of irritating social engagements. But I think going back to the practice thing, certainly I think there is something around that guilt thing that devoting time, and really any practice does take time and discipline, and it does take going in regularly and making stuff again and again and failing over and over again, and all those things we probably talk to kids we work with all the time about, but how much do we do it ourselves? It does take a lot of time, and that does generate guilt, because you think I'm spending all this time indulging in this for myself, not giving to other people. So I think it is it's making art is guilt inducing, but I think it's worth doing it.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear what group 2 had to say. Who was group 2, Beth?
So that was Clara, Jen, Miss Rogers, got their teacher name, Sadie and Victoria.
Hi, yeah, we were talking about a couple of things, and actually I might ask Anna or Aka Miss Rogers to tell her amazing story of the importance of incorporating political ideas with art and how that can actually make a change, because I think it's a fantastic story, Anna. So some of the questions that we had was, how do you cope perhaps when some students, if you're encouraging sort of political thinking with students, what do you do when their political views are quite difficult? An interesting one was, how can you make your art about how can you incorporate your own art into your teaching if it's perhaps inappropriate to what children should see, or if they're just not interested in your art? And then, of course, a big one is that, there was this pressure over lockdown for some artists that released a lot of creativity. And we saw all over Instagram people being like, I finally have the time to make my painting. And but actually, the reality as teachers is that we had a lot of stress getting used to working. We also had lives. There's obviously parents here. So another question was, how did you manage to balance teaching and lockdown? And then finally, we were talking about collaboration and how important that is. But what if other people in your department don't collaborate with you, don't want to do that? So there's quite a few things there.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Cara.
Yeah.
We'll come back to Miss Rogers, Anna. But I'm going to ask Andy. Andy Berriman, do you mind responding to that? Because there's two sort of, perhaps the first two questions there might be within your range. The idea of difficult and different views and how to incorporate, and maybe appropriateness. Do you mind having a think about that for us?
Have a think about it. Yes. Difficult doesn't come up too much because they're at the end of the day, they're kids. It's not, I'm not about indoctrination, but I also think it's really important to be honest about how you feel about things that are happening in the world. I think that the idea that we're just machines and we're going to regurgitate whatever line we're given, I think is wrong, and that sends a message to students as well. So I think being honest about things is really important. But I think if the student wants to express their views and they're completely opposite to mine, then of course I'm not going to prevent them from doing that. If it crosses the line into fascism or sexism or homophobia or racism or whatever, then clearly that intolerance is not tolerated, and that's I think an important distinction to make. Can't remember the second question. There were lots of questions there.
It was about the relationship to your own practice and how appropriate or inappropriate it may be to share with perhaps young people. Okay, and I don't think I made it very clear at the beginning that my practice I've always considered to be what I do in the classroom anyway. So I don't have that guilt. I ignore that guilt. I've ignored that guilt for a while of having to go to a studio or whatever. And I don't feel I need to make work in that respect. I feel the work that I make is in collaboration with the students that I'm with in the classroom, and the projects that I come up with as in my role as a teacher, and considering what I can do with those projects within the community that I'm part of, which is the school community, the audience, the ready audience that we've got there. So yeah, I've not really felt those pressures, but. Okay, thank you. Anna, did you briefly want to interject with what Cara was very kindly offering you up for?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry about the Zoom name. We're using Zoom at our school, and obviously the world would end if my students knew I had a first name. So the student I was talking about was in my year 10 class, and the first day that I met this girl, she stormed into my classroom and said, "Miss, I'm going to do a project about my hair." This has nothing to do with the architecture project that I had planned, but there we go. And she is Nigerian, and she's allowed to wear braids at school because that's within our uniform policy, but she had jewelry in her hair. And this is something that lots of women in her family have always worn. She was something that she felt was a really important part of her identity, and the school was saying no. And so she did this. I thought, SLT aren't really walking around as much, so I think we'll get away with this. And she did a series of paintings about her and her family and the women in her family and their hair. And to sort of cut a very long story short, ended up taking her sketchbook to our head teacher just before the end of the Christmas term and saying, look, there is really no good reason that I can't wear jewelry in my hair, because it's not about our uniform policy. And our school's just changed our uniform policy to reflect the fact that she can wear those things in her hair, which I think is really cool. But then, also the NQT in me sort of felt like, what do I do about this? Am I going to really kick myself in the foot? But I'm glad that I didn't actually now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Let's go to group 3. What sort of points and questions came out of group 3? Beth, who's give us a name?
That was Beth, John, Joe and Rian.
Anybody going to volunteer from that group?
I'll try my best, if that's okay. To be honest with you, it sounds like I need to read this book, Dark Matter, because I one of the members of our group was talking about it, and it sounded really, really interesting, and it made me really think about when I'm making my work, who am I making it for? Am I making it for me? Am I making it for my students? Am I making it for the wider public? And that caused me to reflect on my existing ideas about how some people, their practice as an artist and a teacher are discrete, and other people, they're more intertwined, and whether there's kind of like an ideal way to operate as an artist teacher or not. We also had a photographer in our group who sounded like her work was really interesting, and John was in there. I'm feeling a bit muddled tonight, so sorry. If anyone wants to jump in and save me, you're more than welcome. But that's sort of what we were talking about.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Keda, do you want to just say a little bit more, because we spoke for quite a while, didn't we, last week, about dark matter and marginalized and relational aesthetics, etc. Do you want to perhaps just give people a little bit of a bit more information on that aspect, because it seemed very relevant and pertinent to what you were talking about?
Yeah, I guess so. Relational aesthetics, I don't know how many people have kind of heard of that. It's it's a bit of a poncy word, isn't it? But it's I can send you an article that talks about it in a very short, practical kind of way. But it's about the artists that, I'm sure Henry's done a lot of that kind of stuff, where you're co-creating stuff with people. So I'm trying to think of somebody recent, I can't think who it was, got people to come dressed as penises and throw eggs on a wall, and sort of talking about kind of reproduction and female reproduction, and there are all these kind of different things. The Japanese artist got people to, she made a white room and got people to come in and put stickers all over it and stuff, and this all kind of is under the banner of relational aesthetics, which is getting people to co-create with you, or just take part and make the art themselves. And there's a really good kind of things talking about that, whether or not we need to, the fact that we need to be careful whether we're then saying that this is our work and taking away from the people that are involved in it. And there's a really big question there about whether we're kind of just using people. So relational aesthetics is quite a kind of interesting thing to kind of look into, especially if you're an artist teacher, I think, and you're working socially with people, because we have to be careful that we're not patronizing people or we're not using them. So I think that's quite interesting to look at. The dark matter thing, I think, is slightly different in that it's more about kind of grassroots art and everyday art, and people like the Guerrilla Girls were sort of unknown and wore masks and went into these big institutions and made a kind of big fuss, like there's no women apart from naked women on the walls, and that they were guerrilla artists and they were part of the dark matter. But now they're actually also selling a mug in Tate for $10.99 or something, so they've become sort of in a way part of the mainstream, but they feed into it. So it's all very complicated. There's no kind of right or wrong, and that's the point of art, isn't it, and about making art. There's so much to read, and I'm very happy to share a bunch of stuff that you can then share later, because they are really interesting discussions, but they're quite kind of deep and everybody has a very different angle on it. Can I just come in about this kind of idea of political art and go back to it very quickly, that I've done quite a few workshops with young people that have ended up being quite kind of, oh my gosh, how do I deal with this? Where we had one specifically dealing with young people and civic participation, and we had a gender non-conforming person within the class and another guy who was adamantly against that and was pro-Trump and said girls are girls, boys are boys, stop making a fuss. And we had to kind of directly deal with that, and it was in Cornwall in a kind of very low rent school, and it was really kind of tricky. But I just sort of spoke to him and said, oh, do you really think that? Have you ever met anybody that is different to that? And they were in the same class, but he hadn't sort of noticed. And so I sort of said, I got the group around and just sort of asked, does anybody have a different experience with this? Does anybody feel differently about this? And luckily this girl was quite happy to kind of talk, and the gender non-conforming person were quite happy to talk about their experiences. And it ended up being a little bit fraught for a while, and then a little bit embarrassing. And then everybody just kind of realized that there were just different opinions, and they came out of it brilliantly. And it was about just kind of saying, me having to be the person that kind of said, okay, you've now spoken, that's really, really interesting. Now, can we let this person speak? And just kind of really making sure I gave them equal time, and, you know, just hearing all those different voices, and then not saying this is right or this is wrong, making it quite clear what I thought, but not shutting it down. And by the end, this guy had gone up to the people that disagreed with him and said, I'm sorry, I just didn't know. And it can make a real difference, having that sort of open talk and letting those people who you really disagree with have a minute and just hear another side. I think it's brilliant. And I came out of that feeling amazing, and it was really frightening for a minute, but it's worth doing.
That's great. Thank you very much. And you're quite right. If we can't have the conversations, then you know, where are they going to have some of these difficult issue-based kinds of conversations? So totally get it, totally understand. Can I just say thank you to Beth, and obviously to Katie in the chat for just A, giving us the name, and B, also giving us some links. I'm going to get Beth to sort of store some of these for us, because it's a nice idea that we kind of generate some of this information that we can sort of go back and visit at some later point. So can we perhaps just have group 4 maybe just give us their quick overview, please?
Yeah, group 4 was Dennis and Naomi, but I know Dennis wasn't in the group. So if Naomi doesn't feel comfortable speaking, that's fine. It's, but if they'd like to, that's also fine. I
can't see Naomi.
No.
Okay, I can't see Naomi, so we'll perhaps.
Oh, they're on mute. Hang on.
Is she?
Yeah, sorry. You can probably select unmute.
Oh, I see. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now?
Yeah.
I thought I was in group 5 with a young lady.
I've slightly changed the numbers. You were in group 5, don't worry.
Oh. And we were talking about her project of basing lessons on the road, which is a prominent road that goes through diverse neighborhoods, from London to where she teaches. I'm in the USA, so I don't really know the road, but the fact that it's diverse, that could be a wonderful thing to bring into her diverse population of students.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Was there a particular question that came out of that you wanted the panel to have a think about, or are you quite happy just kind of thinking about a statement about the importance of diversity in?
How to reach diverse students who come from, if you have a group of diverse students with very different social, cultural, economic backgrounds, how to involve them all in your teaching. How would you do it?
Brilliant. Who from the panel would like to respond? Anybody want to wave in particular? Anybody interested in perhaps thinking about that one? Keda, Henry, go on then. You wave first. Go on then.
Yeah, I think so much of this is about being able to listen, and I think that one of the things that not just art teaching, but teaching in general, one of the big issues with it over the last sort of 20 years has been a lack of space to listen, and a kind of imposition of ideas of what we should be interested in and why we should be interested in it, and not actually listening to the young people that we're working with and what they're interested in, what they want to engage with. And I think I've witnessed examples of going in to watch people teach at every level, where you have students asking questions about things, and those questions being closed down by teachers because it's not on the lesson plan, it's not in the scheme of work, it's not going to fulfill the objective for that day. So all that curiosity and all that kind of inquisitiveness is just being killed off. And if education isn't about curiosity, then for me, it's not worth being involved in. So I think in a way that the sort of short answer is it's about listening. And if we listen to the young people that we work with, then we end up with all sorts of diverse interests because people are diverse. So then you can engage in those conversations. And when I was teaching in schools and now teaching in other contexts, but in every context I've taught in, the more I listen, the more I'm coming out of it and learning and feeling like I'm expanding as a person too. So it's rewarding for all of us, you know. And I think it's without wanting to sound trite, it's about listening, and I think it's about respect as well. There's something about flattening out hierarchies. Keda, you touched on this earlier when you were talking about the danger of some kind of approaches to social practice being that you end up with a kind of artist author and lots of people who are engaged, but actually all they're doing is a bit of somebody else's project. And I think it's really important to, in this kind of work, to really flatten that out and to accept everybody as an equal. When we did the project that I mentioned at the Tate, the birthday party project, we had a lovely moment where we had a panel discussion at the culmination of the project. There were a number of different projects, and somebody in the audience asked a question and said, oh, they wanted to ask the artist the question, and the person who was with the microphone gave the microphone to the nominated artist who instigated the project, and he passed the microphone to me, and I passed it to the student who was sat next to me, and they passed it to the teacher next to them, and they passed the student, and everybody started laughing. And this person said, no, I meant the artist. And the artist they'd nominated said, well, all the artists. So which artist do you want to answer the question? And I just think it's that kind of sort of equality that's also really important in terms of including everyone in it. I'll stop there. Hopefully that answered it a bit.
Thank you, Henry. Leslie, you were waving at us. Did you want to come in at that point as well? Oh, and Dennis as well. Should we do Leslie first and then Dennis? Sorry, Dennis.
No.
Leslie, did you want to say, you were waving? Did you want to say something? You're on mute, Leslie.
No, I wasn't waving.
Oh, okay.
I might have been flapping around. No, I wasn't waving.
Put the gin bottle down, Leslie.
It's tonic water.
Dennis, you wanted to come in at that point. Sorry, shoot away, Dennis.
I'm interested in this. I want to come at this from a notion of the gift of otherness, which brings in what Henry's been talking about, and it brings in a kind of micropolitics. Henry referred to things like lesson plans and so on, and I can't remember the name of the speaker who talked about the hair project. I forget her name. Sorry, can't see her on the screen. But she talked about the girl wanting to do. I'm going to do the hair project.
That was Anna.
Anna, which was kind of breaking away from what was deemed to be happening or should be happening, and inserted her own kind of presence into that and negotiated a way through at that kind of molecular level. So I'm trying to work with this notion of otherness and seeing it as a gift to which we can all respond. And so there are no hierarchies and so on and so forth. And so you have this notion of a plural ontology operating across classrooms, across learning spaces. And each voice has value and so on and so forth. A bit like the Quaker notion that in their religion, there are no ministers. So I was just thinking along those kind of lines.
That's a great term, the gift of otherness. Thank you, Dennis. Does that help Naomi in that sort of answering your question?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay.
Very much. Thank you. Well said.
So I'm thinking we've got a couple of more left. So number 6 and number 7 we haven't been to. So briefly, number 6, who was that, Beth?
It was Louise, Danielle, Megan, Robert, and Zoe. If there's anyone from there that would like to, there's no pressure to either.
Sorry, just unmuting. I got nominated. I think we kind of tried to look at why we. Sorry, am I okay? Yeah, sorry, I thought I was getting blurped over. So why make? Why make? I think our conclusion was process over product. Process equals learning, equals practice. It doesn't really matter what you make. The big skip comes at the end of the year to the back of my classroom. We bung all the stuff in it and get ready to make for next year. And it's really about learning. And process is learning. And process is, as a teacher, both practice in terms of teaching and practice in terms of making. And personally, if I can bring those two together in the classroom, we have praxis where theory meets practice. We had quite a number of different practices. Photographers trying to learn painting, painters trying to learn photography, etc. The creative process applied to new disciplines, new materials, equals learning. We did feel there was some talk about school art as opposed to art world art. And what does that mean? And where does the link happen between what happens in school and what happens in the wider world of art? I was really interested personally in the discussion over dark matter and the text that people have been referring to, so I've just ordered it on Amazon. Relational aesthetics, co-creation. I think co-creation in the classroom with the young people that we work with will take us a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Anybody on the panel want to respond? Anybody want to ask anything about that or respond to that? I'm conscious of the time. I said we'd stop at 8 and it's now kind of 6 or 7 minutes, 8 minutes past. So maybe we should give it a wrap up if we're happy with that. Beth, are you quite happy if we do?
Yeah, whatever people.
Okay.
It's all about co-creation, Robert. Absolutely, definitely, totally agree with that.
Indeed. So look, thank you very much, everybody. And on that, as he raises his glass and we see the bottom of the bottle, it seems an appropriate time to sort of thank our 3 panel members for their contribution today, and thank everybody for starting to think about the relationship to your own practice and starting to think about where one might want to how one might want to respond to that question themselves. I've got a few things that I just wanted to sort of offer up for people to think about, and an opportunity to sort of continue the discussion. One was thank you for all of the sharing, all of the links and all of the things in the chat. Beth's going to keep a little sort of a tally of these things, and we can sort of we can collate them so that people can go back and have a look at some of those resources. So that makes perfect sense. But secondly, there's an opportunity that I'd like to offer people if they'd like to engage, and it's quite simple. I would like you to think about sending in an image that for you visually explores or illustrates how you would answer that question. So it could be a piece of your own artwork, or it could be something that you are making in response to that question, or it could be something from the past. But I think it would be nice for us to continue this momentum of starting to produce and to make and to share. So I'm going to ask people to send in an example of what they would say illustrates or visually sort of explores that sort of question. What does it mean to be an artist teacher? And a short statement, as we did last time, a very short statement to support that image, no more than sort of half a page to a page of A4, so that we can then sort of collate and think about maybe in some way curating and exhibiting, sort of continuing this discussion. It may be online, it may be, we haven't really decided at the moment, but we'll just think about it. If you feel you'd like to anonymize it, I get that too, that's fine. If you feel uncomfortable with sharing something, that's fine. I think it'll just be helpful if we could start to perhaps bring a collection of visual responses together. Beth's going to send you the link, and when we contact you, and obviously the recording from this, we can then sort of think about where it goes. But it would be helpful if we could do this before the next session. Now, the next session is going to be in, and Kate's just going to sort of, talk a little bit about that. I think it's in about 4 or 5 weeks. But if you could sort of send to Beth your responses, we'll put it on the website so that it's clear and so that people have this opportunity and to think about where it could go and what we might be able to do with it. So on that note, just on a personal note, thank you. Over to perhaps Kate, who's just going to sort of tell us a little bit about an introduction to the next session and the date.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, that was a brilliant session. Thanks to our speakers and to everybody. I've written down a huge amount of notes and scribbles. Looking forward to next month, I think we are in a very transient and somewhat ephemeral time, and I'm fascinated to know where we are in a month. We might be back in schools, those of us that are teaching, everything might have changed. And looking back on where we were a month ago and thinking about the things that were important to us in our teaching and our artistic practice, ideas of activism and diversity really came forward, this idea of inclusivity. And we've been talking about this, and actually maybe a really important place for us to start next month is with a focus on the idea of access. And I think that would be a good place to focus next month's session, thinking about access of our students and how our students can access our curriculums. We have an opportunity at this point to kind of restart what we're doing in schools when we're going back in. So we should consider kind of how we can access how our students can access curriculums, how our school communities can access the communities around them. I think that's an interesting idea. And also how us as artists, think about hierarchies, big one. How can we as artists access the art world around us in a much more prestigious and kind of exciting way, so that we're not limiting ourselves, we're not considered lesser than anybody else. I think those are 3 different elements of access that we'll be approaching in the next session. It'll be super interactive, lots of great breakout rooms again, and hopefully at a time when we're all hoping to be more energized as we re-enter schools. And yeah, really looking forward to it. So see you all then.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thanks again for everybody joining this evening. It's lovely to see so many faces, and during half term, it's a bloody miracle. You all want to be on the screen. But yeah, I'll be emailing you all tomorrow with the invite to Kate's session, which is on the 16th, exactly a month. It's the 16th of March as well. And I'll also be emailing you a link with where you can upload the things that Andy's asking for as well. And if you have any queries in the meantime, just get in touch with me. But yeah, thank you so much for joining tonight. I'll also, oh, Henry's there.
I was just going to say, before you say goodbye, just to say the foundation has a few other things coming up if people are interested. So we've got a talk on the 25th of February, which is in our series of talks about the legacy of teaching painting in art schools. And we've got 4 panelists from art schools in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales who are going to talk about the shift and tradition of teaching painting at that level. It's free, it's a webinar, so there's no limit on tickets. So if you fancy come to that, you can. We've then got a really interesting talk on the 4th of March, which is Hetty Judah chairing a panel looking at artist mothers and the kind of implications of mothers of young children and how that's navigated in the art world. We've got Fiona Bradley from Fruit Market, somebody from Whitechapel, and 2 artists, Laura Ford and Carrie Spooner, who are going to talk on that. And then on the 11th of March, we have the opening of our Freelands Artist Programme, first Freelands Artist Programme exhibition, which is called Quicksilver, which is 9 artists from that programme we run with emerging artists. And that will also be an online opening for that too. And actually, if you're free tomorrow and you fancy a book launch, that's on as well. I'll be busy on Zoom. But yeah, they're all free. There's loads of tickets. Come along and join in, and hopefully see you at some of those things too.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. So many waves. It's lovely. I like this bit.